Whistle Down the Wind, Side 2. Poor Baby was pretty sharp. He went through the door and we heard him talk to someone. "What you doing with that calf, Eric?" we heard him say. "She's sick. Want to put her in the small barn." "The small barn? That's here." I had goose pimples all over me. "Why?" asked poor Baby outside the door. "Nice and warm in there," Eric answered. "Well, we're playing mothers and fathers in here," poor Baby said, very cleverly, I thought. "But if she must come in, I'll take her." "You ain't got one of them kerosene things in there, have you?" Eric asked. "No," said poor Baby, which is true because it was paraffin. "Think you can manage?" Eric asked. I suppose he was thinking of his tea. "Brat will help," I heard poor Baby reply. Next minute this struggling boy emerged with this maniacal calf. 5 days old it was and fighting like crazy. Well, I did help. It was heavy as hell, and its sticking out hooves trampled all over my bedroom slippers. It damn near knocked the paraffin thing over too, but after what seemed hours to me, poor Baby, Elizabeth and I got it jammed in a corner and tied up. I'd seen this one being born. Amazing, really. Well, there we all were in this teeny place. Jesus and the calf and all these doves, not to mention us 4. "You better go and get its food," I said to poor Baby, "otherwise we'll have Eric in here again." He went. The worst of it was, when he came back with his bucket of milk, Cricky and Susan were behind him. We were appalled. Swallow had all this hay on top of Jesus, and she sat on the manger swinging her feet so they didn't see anything. "What are you doing?" Cricky asked. "Playing," said Elizabeth straight away. "Can we play?" Susan asked. "It's rather a sophisticated game," I said. "Yes, biblical," Elizabeth added. They looked confused. "Well, can't you explain it then?" Cricky asked. We had to keep our beads on him. He's 9 and pretty sharp. "Take too long, it would really," poor Baby said, while he was cramming this calf's face into the milk bucket. "We can watch then, can't we, Crick?" Susan said, grinning. "Oh, it's nothing to watch, just lofty words, that's all," poor Baby said. "Oh." Everyone stood about and said nothing and just stared at each other after that. The time was ticking away, and I thought, this Jesus is suffocating under the hay. Then he moved, turned right over on his side, pulling all the rugs and hay with him. You could see the back of his head quite clearly. You could, really. Cricky and Susan looked at him. "Who you got in the manger, then?" he asked. "A friend," said Swallow. "Yes, a weekend friend," added poor Baby. "He's playing this game with us, this sophisticated game." I was hot as hell in there. This paraffin stove and the hurricane lamp and all these people and calves and the doves breathing, it killed me. "You all look funny to me," Cricky said after a bit. "You look as if you're doing something you shouldn't. I think I'll tell Dad." But this was the last thing we wanted. Swallow made up her mind. "Can you two keep a secret? A really big secret?" "Try us," Cricky said. "You've got to hold up your hand and do the see this wet routine," Swallow said. She looked awfully solemn. They held up their hands and said after her, "See this wet, see this dry, cross my heart if I tell a lie." "Well," said Cricky. Susan got out a bag of bullseyes and we all had one. "This is a great and fabulous secret, known to none but those within these walls. You have to join a society to be allowed to know the secret, and all who know must swear on their dying oath never to divulge." "Is it Brat Society? 'Cause we belong to that already," Susan said. "I must tell you here and now, my society is USH. That means Society Against the Unrightful Slaughter of Horses. That's what she was meaning." "No," said Swallow, "something of even greater importance." Well, I suppose she's right. "Will you absolutely swear?" Swallow demanded. "We've done it, haven't we, with all that see this wet?" "If you ever breathe a word, something ghastly will happen to you," poor Baby said. Swallow nodded. "Well, we do swear, don't we, Sue? We're jolly good at keeping secrets." "All right," said Swallow. "We trust you implicit." Then she got off the manger and pulled back the hay and things. They went nearer and stared down at the man in the manger. He was still asleep, and you could see the oil on his face shining in the light. "Who is it, then? What's so secret about some fella sleeping in a manger?" Cricky seemed madly disappointed. "Ah," said Swallow, "but what fella? Who is it?" "Well, how should I know?" Cricky said. "I don't know your weekend guest, do I?" "Well, I'll tell you. Always remembering your vow to the society." They looked at her expectantly. "That's Jesus." Swallow said it triumphantly but quietly. "Jesus?" Cricky was thunderstruck, I could see that. "Jesus," said poor baby. "Just Jesus, that's all." Cricky didn't know what to say. "It isn't," said Susan, rather rudely, I thought. "We have proof," I said sternly, though actually we hadn't much. "Has Dad and their mothers seen him?" Cricky asked. "Of course not. We are the privileged few so far. They will, of course, in time, and so will the whole world. Thousands and thousands of people will pour into this farm pretty soon." Cricky sat down by the calf. He looked shattered, he did really. "How do you know it's him?" he asked. "He told us, didn't he, Elizabeth?" Swallow turned to Elizabeth and she nodded furiously. "When and how?" Cricky pressed on. Elizabeth took up the story. "Me and Swallow was in here messing about. There was a sort of knock on the door and Swallow opened it. He stood there smiling at us and said, 'Knock on the door and it shall be opened unto you.' And she said, 'Who are you?' And he stood staring round this place, not answering at once. Then suddenly he said rather loud, 'Jesus,' just like that." She said it all in one breath and had to stop, so Swallow went on. "His legs were all cut and his boots and socks crammed with mud. He toppled over to that manger and half fell in. I asked him if I should get someone, and he said, 'Don't tell them till I've recovered.'" "Tell them what?" I was glad to see Susan get out a bag of bullseyes again. "That he was Jesus, of course," Swallow said, a bit annoyed. "Know something?" said Cricky. "I've got to have a ruddy great miracle before I'm going to believe." That's what I'd felt, but I hadn't said it. "You will. You see if you don't. He's ill. Too ill to talk yet. He's been asleep for 6 hours. He's got a 101 temperature. Give the man a chance." "All right," said Cricky agreeably, "I will." Swallow suddenly had another thought. "And another thing. Just let me show you something." She went over to the manger and struggled with Jesus till she had hold of both feet. "Look," she said. We all crowded round and looked. In the centre of both feet were holes. All of a sudden I was convinced. I hadn't seen them before. Cricky stared. You mean... He couldn't go on, he couldn't really. "I do mean," said Swallow. "Caw," said Cricky. I could see we had him at last. He stood staring at us, then back at the man. His face went all thoughtful. "The manger, the doves, and a newborn calf. Oh, sweet, isn't it?" Swallow looked so pleased. "So you see, Crick, not a word, not yet, not till he's better, and can tell us what he wants us to do. Don't you agree?" Crick nodded. Susan passed round the bullseyes. "Suppose, just suppose, the grown-ups don't believe. Suppose they try and take him away. After all, they did last time." He spoke slowly and with horror, I thought. This hadn't crossed our minds, but we had to admit the possibility. It was rather awful. "After all, the grown-ups crucified him, didn't they?" Cricky asked, and we had to agree. "I know," said Swallow. "There's hundreds of children round here, and every child knows other children. We can have a gigantic meeting. We can tell all of them, sway them all to secrecy. bring them a few at a time, like a pilgrimage, to see him and hear his words. Or secretly we can spread the news to children all over the country, so that the first people to know Jesus has come back will be the children. And if the grown-ups try to take him away again, we'll defend him. Hundreds of us. Good show, said poor baby. We all agreed. We all shook hands and dipped our fingers in blood. Actually, it was Elizabeth's blood. A cut in her knee which had healed. She scratched it open again. Then Cricky said he had to go to tea, and they went. Jesus was still asleep. We agreed to go to the nursery and get to bed early. Then when everyone was asleep, we'd come back. We could use my alarm, Swallow said. We put out the lights, collected up Betty Davis, and went. When Cookie came to the nursery to tell us it was bedtime, she asked us what we were reading. Revelations, I said, because we were. It was 2 o'clock when my alarm went off. Everybody calls it an alarm, don't ask me why. I had to fling myself on it and get it into bed with me in case anyone woke up and thought it was that old telephone. The other 2 took a lot of waking. I wish they'd all had alarms, but the noise would have been tremendous. We pulled on our trousers over our pyjamas like Father does when he goes out milking, shoved socks on, and then crawled like snails down these stairs with the matting on them. It's not too easy to open the kitchen door without a click, but we made it. It isn't easy, as that door has just about the noisiest click any door ever had, and Cookie goes by that click. Any other time she'd been out of her room like a stoat, but this night there weren't any groanings or cursings from her room, so we went on out. The whole countryside was lit up with moonlight and smelled sweet, like spring was coming. We had to admit it was pretty good. We ran into 1 or 2 of these cats pawing round the place, and poor baby stood on one of them. It let off a hell of a piercing yell, and we had to lean back against the wall. Lucky for us, we looked up at Violet's window without going any farther. She was there, leaning out and staring round. She has to do this because of her hangover. She needs air. Well, we just had to go the long way round. Oddly enough, I was sweating. I can't tell you why. I told poor baby, he said he was too. We all tailed along after Swallow, who was skimming a bit. But when we got to the barn door, we all stopped. We were all a bit terrified, we were, honestly. Well, we'd never been on this sort of jaunt before. We weren't too sure what we'd find inside. I mean, he could have been dead for all we knew, and then what were we to do? We could hear some scratching about going on over our heads. We reckon it was rats or bats or birds or something. I wish I had something comforting to eat, poor baby said, and I agreed. There's cake and toast and stuff in there, Swallow said, but that didn't make us feel any too good. I mean, you can't be nursing someone back to health and just go in and sit down and eat up all his cake. We were near the swing, so I sat on it. Swings are very cheering things if you want to think. I think we made a hideous mistake, I told Swallow. I don't think I should have let my alarm off. I think we should all be still asleep like everyone else. Violet isn't asleep, she reminded me. Nor are those old cats poor baby trod on. There's a certain amount of nightlife, admitted poor baby, but my feet are cold. Which is not to be wondered at, as we were only in our stockings. Well, it's our duty to see us all right. After all, night nurses are up all night looking after their patients, aren't they? In the end, we went in. Just inside the door were these hurricane lamps, so we lit one with poor baby's matches and crawled through the damp old barn, still in our stocking feet, which were pretty cold by now. Jesus was still asleep. Well, naturally, I suppose he would be. Anyone would be in the middle of the night. Swallow put her hand on his head. He jumped right up, sat staring. You know, like people do when they get wakened up suddenly and don't know where they are. Except that I always know where I am because I'm in my bedroom. But I could see it was different for him, as he was in a strange place. Well, we all stared at him, and he at us. He looked lousy. His face was terrible white in the hurricane light, and his hair was all over the place. Then suddenly he sort of grinned. "Hello," he said. "It's you again, is it?" We said it was. "Are you feeling better?" Swallow asked him. You've been ill all day with a temperature of 101, and we thought we'd better come and see what kind of a night you were having." "And what time is it?" he asked. 2 a.m, she said. 2 a.m? He seemed surprised. "You mean to say you three got out of your bed at 2 a.m. to see how I was?" We nodded. "Well, I think that's the nicest thing I ever heard of," he said. "No one's ever been as nice as that to me. Not as long as I can remember. 3 kids. Huh. I call that wonderful. Makes you believe in human nature again." He smiled at us all round. "Do you feel better?" Swallow asked again, and he nodded. "I'm all right. I think I've had a chill. I must press on." He tried to struggle up out of the manger as if he wanted to go straight away, but Swallow stopped him. "Oh, you can't go yet," she said. "You're not well enough." "That's very kind of you, but I must press on." And he frowned a bit as if he didn't much want to go anyway. "Why must you press on?" Poor baby was messing about with his matches, dying to light up a bit of hay. "I don't want to get you kids into trouble, do I? Just because you sheltered me." Then he laughed. "What'll your mother say if she catches you out here at 2 a.m? "Oh, that's all right," I said. "You don't have to worry on our account. You don't really. I mean, we haven't got a mother." "Oh, I'm sorry." And he looked sorry too. "I remember when I was 6, my mother used to cry a great deal," he said. "Really?" I answered. "I wonder why." "Probably," poor baby said, "because with all that carpentry she thought you'd hammer your finger or something." I suppose he was thinking of his mother, because he didn't answer. I was beginning to feel darn cold, I was really. My feet were like ice and I wanted to sit down. Actually, I wanted to be back in bed, so I did the next best thing and sat on the wet floor. "You'll give yourself piles if you sit there," he said. I got up at once. "What's piles?" I asked. I suppose I should have known, but I have a bit of a bird brain. "It's what you get from sitting on cold, wet stones," he said, and I thanked him for noticing. "You're sweet kids, that's what you are. Why on earth should you be so good to a stranger?" "For one thing, we know who you are," Swallow said, and she grinned. "You do?" His voice was very quiet. I noticed that from the start. "And we're going to look after you," she added. "Are you?" He wasn't smiling anymore. "Why should you want to?" "Because I don't suppose anyone believes in you, do they?" I asked. He shook his head and sighed a bit. "No." "Well, we do," said Swallow. "And very soon hundreds of us all over the country will." "Hundreds?" He seemed madly interested, because he leaned forward suddenly, but actually it was after a bit of leftover cake which he ate. "Oh, thousands could be," Swallow went on. She looked at us and we nodded. "Thousands? Of people?" "Not people," Swallow replied. "Children." "Honestly?" He seemed a bit pleased. "How's that? How do they know about me? Is it in the papers?" "Oh, we haven't seen any papers," poor baby told him. "Well, how do you know who I am?" he asked me. "Well, Swallow and Elizabeth told me, and that was true." "Who told Swallow and Elizabeth?" he kept on at me. "You did yourself. You said your name when you came in here. Of course, you might not have meant to, as you were a bit sick with this 101 temperature, but there you are, you did." "And you haven't told anyone else?" "Of course not," Swallow said, "because you asked me not to. Don't tell them till I've recovered. Well, that's what you said. A few of us kids know, but you're perfectly safe with us." "I bet I am," he said, and grinned all over his face. "I bet there's more of the milk of human kindness in kids than there is in anyone." He ruffled up poor baby's hair. "I shall never forget you kids. When I'm lonely or sick or scared, and I am scared sometimes, I shall remember you kids. Well, why don't people believe in you then? Poor baby asked him. Oh, that's a very long story. Oh, you can say that again, poor baby replied. Just about the longest old story, that's all. I shouldn't worry too much, I told him. It's these grown-ups. They don't believe in anything. If you tell them something quite ordinary and corny, they go off into this phony laughter. I've given them up, I have really. He didn't laugh. Well, they don't even do anything much, poor baby said. And if you go so far as to offer them a bit of gum or something, they just go, ugh, at you. When we all grow up, it'll be different. Will it, I wonder? That's the tragedy, old son. When you go through that barrier marked the end of childhood, you become one of them. You forget. It's sad, but you forget. The older we get, the more we forget of our decisions and plans. Elizabeth said you walk with a limp. Do you still? Swallow asked him, sort of eager beaver. Yes, I do. I always will. I've got a hole right through my foot. Both feet, you mean? Poor baby reminded him. He looked quite surprised. That's right. Both feet. Must have hurt, poor baby said. I stuck a pitchfork in my foot, for that was bad enough, and I don't suppose you had a tetanus injection, did you? The man in the manger shook his head. He looked very tired all of a sudden. Are you hungry or thirsty? Swallow asked him. She's very good at being social, always remembers to ask people if they want a drink. I am a bit, he admitted, but don't worry, it's too late. Go on, Brat, get some bread. Swallow turned to Jesus. Would you like some wine? Bread and wine? So we can make it a sort of, you know. This made him laugh. Don't ask me why. Anyway, I went. It was freezing cold and all grey and horrid again. This old moon had given up the struggle and disappeared, and there were clouds right down to my ears. I got back into the kitchen with no one seeing me. Old Violet had given up the unequal struggle too and gone back to bed. I found the bread in the bin and looked under the cupboard for the wine bottle Cookie uses for sauces and soups. I saw this bottle of vinegar and nearly took it by mistake, and I thought, that's a bit near the knuckle, I thought, and I took this old dreggy bottle instead. Everything was going fine, and I was on my way out again when one of these lousy cats that hang about thinking about nothing but food and mice jumped up on me from the fridge and knocked the top of the dustbin. Made a hell of a noise, and I had to leg it as fast as I could in these stockings and getting stones and things in my toes. I literally threw the bread at Jesus and elbowed the wine into the manger. Hey, Swallow, I sort of hissed. One of these corny cats kicked the hell out of the dustbin, and Cookie is bound to be nosing about with that poker. Swallow doesn't waste much time, and in a second she had the hay all over the top of him, all in the bread and everything. Lie still, she whispered. Don't move or munch loudly. No one will come in here, no one at all. Then she suddenly got hold of my arm and squeezed it till I nearly shrieked. What about the calf? I know, said poor baby. Eric doesn't come till 5:30. Brat can get up again, stand around like she's anxious to help him. Why not you? I said in a deadly voice. Because you have the alarm, he told me. We could see the hay going up and down as though someone was laughing. Oh, well, all right, I said. I don't believe I'd have done it for anyone else. I don't really. When we finally got back to the kitchen door, it was locked. We knew Cookie'd been up, but she'd gone back to bed as all the lights were out. We climbed up this wisteria tree to old Violet's bathroom and tiptoed to our beds. When I got under the clothes, I felt like I'd got a cold, so I took up my little Vic inhaler and had a long sniff. Then I put this bloody alarm right for 5:30. I looked in on Jesus before I struggled with this cough. Are you okay? I asked him. Yes, I'm okay, he said. But cold. Terrible cold. I went back to the washroom and found him another blanket. It was just on 5:30. I knew these men would be along pretty soon for the milking, so I hung about. Pretty soon I saw my father coming down from the house. He looked surprised to see me, he really did. What on earth are you doing at this time of the morning? He asked. I couldn't sleep, I told him. So I thought I'd come down and help with the milking or the calves or something, I said. Oh, that's very considerate indeed. He seemed quite pleased in a way. First thing you can do is make some tea, he said. I could do with a cuppa. Hell, I thought. I making the tea and then Eric goes in and finds Jesus. Sure you want tea, I asked. What about a nice drink of Alka-Seltzer? No, tea, he said, and went off into the cowshed. I went back to the kitchen and made the tea and put on an extra cup for Jesus. The wind was whistling down the drive, nearly blew all these damn cups over. I was fed up, I was really. I took it into the cowshed and everyone seemed pleased enough. You got a cup too many, Dad said. Yes, well, I don't know why, I said. I think I'll dip my cuppa outside in the air. All this smell of cowpats kills me in the early morning, it does really. I got out with my cup and took it straight to Jesus. He was thrilled. You're a good kid, he said. That'll just about put me right. Oh, my feet are murder. I didn't look too good, but there wasn't anything I could do, so I went back into the cowshed. Bess, one of the cows, had sat right down in the middle of everything and couldn't move. Dad and the others were staring at her and pushing and shoving. Mastitis, Edward said, and Dad hummed. I'll feed that calf, I told Eric, and he seemed pleased and poured the milk out into a bucket. Well, I staggered back into the stable where Jesus and the calf were and started to feed her. He watched me all the time while he drank his tea. I ought to go, Brat, he said. Oh, not till Swallow says so, I told him. This tea is balm in Gilead, he said, and snuggled down again under the blanket. I wish I could stay here forever. Well, you can if you want to, I told him, but he laughed and shook his head. I can't settle anywhere yet, he said. I have to keep moving. Why? I asked him. The time is not ripe, is all he said. I don't think I've ever felt more tired. I was kind of rolling. I wished I was in bed and everything was just the same as usual. Then horrors descended on me, and I realized it was Monday. In about 2.5 hours, this Land Rover would be outside the door to take us to school. Look here, I said. It's Monday and we have to go to school. Will you be okay? Hope so, he said. Well, bring your food and stuff before we go, of course, I said. But we don't come back till 4:30, so you must stay hidden. He nodded. He didn't look too happy. When I'd finished the calf and cleaned out the bucket, I went back to the cowshed and had a cup of tea. I had a foul old cold by now and I didn't feel too good. What's all this sneezing? Father asked me. I got a cold, I said, and blew my brains out on my hanky. Better get something for it or go back to bed till Cookie is up, he said. A sudden idea struck me. If my cold was real bad, I wouldn't have to go to school, and I could sleep a bit and then keep my eye on Jesus. I made like it was even worse, you know, sort of hanging nose and open mouth and eyes all bleary. I don't think Miss D would care for me to take this cold to school, I told Father. It makes her cross when kids have colds. You better see Cookie and tell her I said to stay in bed for a bit, he said. I was pretty pleased about this. I went in and told Cookie. She was livid. She hates us hanging about, not being in school. It means more cooking and looking after people with trays and things. The house was freezing and the wind was howling. I felt like hell. I like the house when old Nellie is hoovering and the fires are lit. I got old Betty Davis out of the bath and took her in bed with me. I must have gone to sleep, because I woke up suddenly. There was Swallow and poor Baby by the bed. What's the time? I asked them. 10 o'clock, Swallow said, but Father told us we weren't to go. I sat up. Well, why not? Swallow shook her head. Maybe he thinks I've got chicken pox or something. No, it isn't that, she said. We were having breakfast, and Father said you had this cold and to leave you alone, and then the phone goes, and he has a long talk, then he comes back to the table and says, you two better stay at home as well today. Well, maybe Miss D has something infectious, I suggested. It's wonderful luck, said Swallow, because now we can keep our eye on you-know-who. Well, can it be anything to do with him? I asked. I mean, maybe he's created a miracle because he knew we were tired. Swallow shook her head again. No such luck. I think maybe poor baby and I better go and see him. He wasn't too good at 5:30, I told her. He was freezing cold. Not dead? Poor baby looked horrified. Oh, no, he had some tea, I reassured them. When they'd gone, I leaned back on the pillow and stroked Betty Davis. I wasn't so pleased with everything now. Here I was, stuck in this bedroom with a phony cold, and they weren't going to school either. I was fed up, I was really. My room was icy. I could hear this wind yelling round the house, and I'd read all the books on the shelf a dozen times. My nose felt all bunged up, so I had a little go with my little inhaler, and then I must have gone to sleep again. There wasn't any sign of life when I woke up, but there was a tray of stuff by the bed. The tea was cold again. I was getting sick of cold tea, I was really. So I ate the toast and got out my dictionary and looked up purpose. Idea or aim, kept before the mind as the end of effort. That's what it said. I couldn't make head or tail of it, honestly I couldn't. I was pretty sick of bed already, so I got on my sweater and trousers and crept downstairs. I heard Cookie talking to Granny and listened. No wonder she has a bad cold, Cookie was saying. They were out in the early hours of the morning, the three of them. Well, I guess she took cold. Oh dear, Granny was moaning. They're just growing up like wild animals. Huh, I wish we were, I thought. I just wish we were. And now this added horror. Well, thank goodness I'm here to help you, Cookie dear. I was hoping to hear more, but they seemed to have gone away, and when I got down to the room, it was empty. Added horror? What could Granny mean? I went on down to the cowshed. There didn't seem to be anyone about except this old dog, Charlie Staircase, who was sniffing around the swing. Fine Swallow, I said encouragingly, but he cut me stone dead and went off in the other direction with his nose on the ground. I had to find out what this added horror was. I was beginning to get in a bit of a stew, even wondered if I had some awful disease and everyone was avoiding me. I went into the stable. To my surprise, it was full. Swallow, poor baby, Cricky, Susan, Elizabeth, Shirley, Pippa, Jeremy, Andrew, Rosanna and Jenny. What in heck is going on? I asked, and they all jumped. What in heck are you all doing not in school? There isn't any school, Shirley said. All of us is away from school. Has Miss D got something then? I asked. Then I remembered Granny and Cookie. Listen, I said to them. I heard Granny tell Cookie there was an added horror. Well, that's why we aren't at school, Jeremy said. But what? It must be the plague, the Black Plague, Pippa said. That's all it could be. Well, who has it then? I asked. Perhaps it's you, Cricky said. Rather unkindly, I thought. I've got an ordinary cold, I told them. I caught it from Jesus. The man in the manger laughed. Well, anyway, Swallow said, this is our great opportunity to organise the secret society. We've already told hundreds while you've been asleep. Don't forget I had to have my alarm going off twice in the night, I said. I'm dead, that's what I am. I looked at Jesus. He was sitting up. He'd been telling them stories or something. He looked very peaceful and he smiled at me a lot. Brat saved my life at 5:30 with tea, he said. When you others were all hogging it in your beds, I reminded them, and put Betty Davis back in the manger with him. What's the time? I asked. 1:45, Jeremy said. He's got such a big watch it takes up half his arm. 1:45? My God, how time flies! Everyone started shuffling towards the door. Now, don't forget your instructions, Swallow warned them, and always remember, it's a secret from the grown-ups. They all nodded and beetled off. Outside, this Charlie Staircase character was still smelling about. What's he after? Poor baby asked. He's on the track of something, Swallow said. Then her hand flew to her mouth, like she thought of something. Strange footmarks, she whispered. I nodded. Old Charlie Staircase was going to give the show away. Poor baby had hold of him in a second. We must shut him up in the nursery, he said. Naturally, we agreed. After we'd done it, we washed and tidied ourselves up for lunch and went down to the dining room. Actually, we were keen to find out about the added horror, and we reckoned if we sat quietly, just stroking Betty Davis and not talking, we might get some news. They were all in there when we opened the door, the whole lot. They stopped talking and looked round at us in silence. "Brat, darling, I thought you were in bed with a cold," Granny said. "I was, all morning I was," I answered, "but I didn't want to give Cookie the trouble of taking up my tray, so I came down." "Don't you give me your cold," Violet said, and moved farther away. "I've only just lost one." "Perhaps Brat found it," poor baby said, and started on these peanuts. "Why isn't anyone going to school?" I asked Father. "Is there an epidemic?" "Sort of," he said, and got out that old golden bottle. Something's up, I thought. "Is it the plague, then?" I asked. "It certainly is a sort of plague," Granny said, and old Cocky nearly nodded his head off. A sort of plague. We looked at each other, trying not to show our delight. "Well, how long before we can go back to school?" Swallow asked pleasantly. "Oh, probably tomorrow or the next day," Father said. "It depends." "What does it depend on?" poor baby asked him, not quite so pleasantly. "It's really nothing to do with you, darlings," Granny poked in. "I shouldn't ask any more questions if I were you." "But you're not us, Granny, and it is to do with us, as it's our school which is caught up in this sort of plague," I said very firmly. "You can say that again," poor baby added. "Listen, I don't want to talk any more about it, so shut up." Father handed a glass of this golden stuff to old Violet. There wasn't anything more to say, so we just sat in angry, disconsolate lumps, waiting for lunch and wishing we hadn't come in early. Then Violet started. "What an extraordinary smell," she said suddenly. "I hope it's not the pheasant we're having for lunch," old Cocky mumbled into his glass. "It certainly isn't pheasant," Violet said, and began looking around the room. Then they all started sniffing about. I don't know why they were making such a fuss. I couldn't smell anything, but then I had this cold. "Perhaps it's Betty Davis," I said helpfully. "Maybe she's cut." After that, all hell broke loose. Granny let off one of these moaning "oh!" as she does when she's upset, and old Cocky choked up his drink into the glass. As for Violet, she just let off this shriek, and before we knew it, we were all outside the room with Betty Davis, and the door was shut. "Well, really," I said, "what a fuss! It was a possibility." We messed about in the nursery after that. Poor baby had a smoke, and I did a bit of crayoning. Back in the dining room for lunch, they seemed to have got over their upset and were quite conversational. "Did you say hares and rabbits today?" Granny asked me. I told her no. "Did you, Granny?" poor baby asked. "No, but I do like to say it," she said. Silly, really. All the time I kept finding Father looking round at us. He was watching out for this plague, and we knew it. "Well, I suppose you're glad you're away from school for a day or two," he said. I nodded. "I am," poor baby said. "School isn't my best subject." "What is then?" asked old Violet. "Sleeping," he said, and they all laughed. They slay me, these grown-ups, always yakking away at every darn thing you say. I suppose it was the bottle again. After this, we got on the subject of bats. This went on for an hour. "And do you know, darlings," Granny said, "they hang upside down in a dark place all winter and never eat a thing." We told her we did. "But if the weather is warm, they come out and fly about, you know." We told her we knew. Then she started this story about her father having a huge long beard, and one day sitting out on some balcony in China, one of these bats got stuck in his beard. Pretty soon, after struggling with this bat to get it out of his beard, they had to get the nail scissors and cut the beard off. She sat looking at us, waiting for some remark. She got it from poor baby. "Did he look any better?" he asked her. And they went off into this laughing routine again. "What are you all going to do this afternoon?" Father asked suddenly. We all looked at each other and said absolutely nothing. Father went on. We could all go for a shoot. Nothing. Absolutely no word would come out of us. Or a movie. Now, how about a movie we can find the right one? We knew there'd be a catch in it. It would have to be the right one. Something corny. Oh, thanks awfully, Dad, but actually we've got plans, Swallow replied carefully. Plans? What plans? He pressed on, helping himself to some of that disgusting cheese called Stilton. Well, actually some of the kids are coming over and we're going to, well, play. Fancy turning down a movie. Most unlike them, isn't it, Slim? Granny remarked. Just as well, I've got plenty to do. But look here, I don't want you leaving the farm, understand? We nodded. You can mess around the fields nearby, but no one is to cross the road to the other farm. Why not, as a matter of interest? Asked poor Baby. Just because I say so, he answered, and got up from the table. We went out to the goldfish pool and stood in a clump so no one could hear what we had to say. There's something fishy, poor Baby said, staring at these goldfish. Perhaps it's foot and mouth, Swallow suggested. We nodded. I felt depressed and said so. It's these fish going round and round and having no purpose, poor Baby remarked. Perhaps we should get out our fishing rods and catch them. What for? I asked him idly. To give them a change. We could put them in the bath for the afternoon, he answered. Futile, really, I told him. Futile, agreed Swallow. Anyway, what about him? Perhaps we ought to change his hiding place, I suggested. But I knew that was futile too. Lousy, really. What about his lunch? Asked poor Baby. It's not so easy to get him anything decent, while I was thinking hard. He must be sick of cake and milk, and I'll bet there's not a bone left of that pheasant. We all nodded gloomily. Actually, I rather wished I was at school. There's always something to do there. Here's old Elizabeth, cried poor Baby suddenly, and there she was. She had a sack she was humping along. Looked like a dead cat in it or something. What you got there? I asked her. Tomatoes and things, she answered straight away, and some old pies. Oh, good, shouted Swallow and ran towards her. At the same moment round the corner came those two, Jeremy and Andrew. They had a bottle wrapped in newspaper. I always know bottles. What's in there? Rum, they said, and undid it. Come on, cried Swallow. Now we can have a decent meal, and if everyone brings something